Chris Farley was a once-in-a-generation clown.
I would cry with laughter. He was completely fearless.
You're terrible.
But he couldn't afford for the laughter to end.
So many levels.
He used humor to cover up his pain, but he didn't see how dangerous that mania really was.
Because when the camera stopped, the darkness set in.
That's why he had to go to church every day, and why he had to do drugs. Try to kill the demons.
Haunted by his weight.
He was going to have to be on camera with his fat hanging out.
Desperate for his father's approval.
Who are these people saying you can't have a drink with your dad?
Farley chased a ghost that promised him fame and a never-ending party.
He wanted to live like Belushi, and he wanted to die like Belushi.
Chicago, 1997. Chris Farley is found dead on the floor of his 60th story apartment.
Tonight in Chicago, there are tears at the death of Chris Farley.
Those of us who knew Chris saw this coming.
The beloved star's life has been cut short. He dies alone at the age of 33.
You know, Sopa, I didn't forget the request that you gave me back in July to do a video on Chris Farley. I think it was the video I did about Mike Tyson on the edge of disaster, on the brink of disaster, or something like that. And I didn't forget. I just wanted to do it on the right channel, on the right forum. But anyway, those of you subscribed to this channel, this is the first upload I've done in over a year and a half. And anyway, when I think of you know, Chris Farley, I think about Saturday Night Live. And I remember when I was like, wow, what, 7, 8 years old, I used to watch a lot of the old, I mean, if you're about my age or older, you might remember Nick at Night. Nickelodeon used to have Nick at Night, and they used to show some old Saturday Night Live episodes. And this is before PC really came into effect, you know what I'm saying, like political correctness. And a lot of stuff was not edited, you know, it was particularly because it came on at night. And, you know, I didn't get all of the jokes, you know what I'm saying, I was only a kid. I was pretty precocious. I got more than the average kid, but some of the things I didn't understand until I got a little older. But, you know, I understand, you know, the inaugural cast from 1975 to 1980 is considered like the gold standard. You know, Chevy Chase was there the first season. I think he left. So you had Chevy Chase, John Belushi, you had Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray later on, Gilda Radner, Lorraine Newman, Garrett Morris. I think that's pretty much, that might be pretty much it. I might be forgetting some people. I know that's considered the gold standard, but I still think personally that the cast from 1987 through 1993 or 94, is pushing it, is at least a close second. And I think that cast is almost or just as talented as that first cast. And Chris Farley, I thought, was one of the funniest comedians I've ever seen. And this might be something that, this is just my opinion, and I know that I'm in the minority on this one. John Belushi may have been a more talented, overall talented person as far as like being able to do more in-depth characters, better impressions. He got more out of his talent than Chris Farley did. But just me personally, I thought that Chris Farley was funnier than John Belushi. And I know I might be in a minority on that one, but I thought Chris Farley was one of the funniest motherfuckers ever. And it's just the thing, like, he was he just scratched the surface on what he could do. The movies really didn't show what he could do. He was very, like, one thing I thought that was funny about him, a lot of people say, well, he just played the same guy. Well, you could say that, but see, you gotta understand too that most of his movies, the script was for him to play the same guy. I mean, if you look at Tommy Boy, his character was the same guy pretty much from Black Sheep. You know what I'm saying? Like, basically in his movies, he played the same guy. I did think that as he got toward the end of his career, there was more of a darker edge to some of his characters, as opposed to when he first got in the movies. He always played these sort of bashful sweetheart type guys, and then toward the end he would play these guys who seriously had demons. You know, I did notice that a little bit. Could that be because he was starting to battle more of his demons and it just came out that way? Who knows? But one of the things that that you just noticed about him was that was obvious was that he had a weight problem. He was heavy, sometimes much heavier than other times. This photo right here came out in late 1994, and this is pretty much the thinnest he had ever been as an adult. This is when he had cleaned himself up from drugs. He was going to be fired from Saturday Night Live. Lorne Michaels had dealt with the situation with John Belushi, seen him, spiral out of control and die of a heroin overdose, speedball overdose. And he didn't want the same thing to happen again. And he was much more hard on Chris than he had been on Belushi 15, 20 years earlier. Well, 15 years earlier. And, Chris came back and he was much thinner. He looked healthier. And I got to say, this was before the internet. And I was at the time a tweener entering my teens. So every little thing that you did wasn't just put out there for the world to see. I didn't know anything about the drugs until after he died. I just noticed that he had a problem. The only thing that I could detect from the media was that he had a problem with eating. It wasn't until I was about 17 that I even realized he had any problems whatsoever with drugs or alcohol. Like I said, this was a different world 20 years ago. But ultimately, he was, even amongst his colleagues, he was considered the funniest. Chris Rock has said that he thought that out of all of the guys of their show, of their era, although Phil Hartman and Dana Carvey and Mike Myers were probably the stars in the early 90s, there was sort of like the bad boys of the Saturday Night Live era. That would probably include, like I said, Farley, David Spade, Rob Schneider, I'm forgetting somebody, Chris Rock, who was there briefly. That generation were considered the bad boys, and all of them, Adam Sandler, Chris Rock, all of them said they thought Farley was by far the funniest, but he just didn't get enough of his talent out there when it came to movies because they wanted to stereotype him all the time. A lot of times, if you look at some old SNL clips with Farley and Sandler almost always cracks up when he's doing a scene with Farley. I remember even in Billy Madison, and Farley was barely in the movie, and every time that he was doing a scene with Farley, he would just crack up because he would just say Farley was just so funny. You know, he would just do certain things and say things in certain ways that it just, you know, you couldn't help from crack up, man. He just was a naturally funny individual. And unfortunately, as Chris became more successful when he left the show or was fired, depending on how you want to look at it. When he left the show, he started doing movies, Tommy Boy, Black Sheep. He started making millions of dollars. And some, you know, people who, the thing about when you're an addict, I'm not a drug addict or anything like that. I've never had problems with drugs. But for things I've noticed from people who I've observed who have these problems with addiction is you have to steer clear from bad environments and individuals who can get you right back into that lifestyle. And I think that's what happened to Chris. He got back with hanger-ons who were only going to use him to be able to get themselves what they want and use his wealth and influence to, you know, get that for themselves. And I remember, you know, Beverly Hills Ninja came out early in 1997. I think it was January of 1997. And he appeared on the Jay Leno show. And this clip's probably on YouTube. I remember seeing it on YouTube. It probably still is. Because he had on this, I'm trying to remember, I think Chris had on this really loud, sort of lavender, weird, sort of like, almost like a genie type outfit, coat or some shit. And I remember being shocked at how much weight he had put on. He had put on a little bit of weight, you know, but he had really packed on a lot of weight. And he said he couldn't breathe. And I remember he said something like, you know, Jay, have you ever had shooting pains through your arms or something, you know? And he kind of said like to be funny, but, you know, in hindsight, it's like, you know, well, was he really having chest pains, you know? And, you know, it went through, you know, the year went through, whatever. And I started reading more articles with him as far as troubles, you know, as far as having health issues, as far as gossips. And I'll never forget, there was I think it was the National Enquirer in September. And they had a article, which is actually where I borrowed the tagline for that Mike Tyson video. I think I named it Mike Tyson, The Edge of Disaster. And I actually borrowed that because I was thinking about Farley. And the National Enquirer article was Chris Farley on The Edge of Disaster. And they predicted it to a T that he was on the verge of death. And that was the first time I had learned anything or heard anything about as far as drugs. And I remember the last time I saw Chris Farley live, it was October 25th, 1997. He was hosting Saturday Night Live. And I remember, I think the guys can fact check me, but I think the musical guest that night was the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. And I remember seeing him, and I was absolutely shocked. I was shocked. It was the heaviest I'd ever seen him. He could not breathe. It was very painful to watch him on television. He looked like he could pass out. He looked like he could have a heart attack at any moment. He looked like he was intoxicated, to be honest with you. He just looked terrible. And although I thought the show was mildly funny, I was very, very bothered by the way he looked. And 2 months later, a little bit less than 2 months later, actually, I remember I came home from school. I think it was December 18th, 1997. And that's when I learned that he had passed away. It was soon after that also he learned about the drug issues, the alcohol issues, and the very tragic circumstances surrounding his death. Being with a stranger who cared nothing about him, who could have potentially saved his life, and ignored his pleas when she walked out on him. And he pleaded with her, saying, please don't leave me. And that was the last words he ever said to anybody.